Welcome to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran, and today's episode is a little bit different. It's actually a live conversation I had with Dr. Anne who's doing incredible work in women's health and hormone education. She just started her new podcast, which is called Face to Face, the Hormone Health Show, where she helps people better understand their bodies, their cycles, and everything we were never really taught growing up about our health as women. This includes menopause, PCOS, symptoms of PCOS, period literacy, and all the things in between. In this chat, the live stream we did back in the summer of 2025, maybe I won't say that. In this chat, we talked about how we've been brought up to experience our periods, the shame, the silence, and the stories we have carried, and how we can start changing that for the next generation. And even ourselves, it's never too late to flip the script. So this one isn't just for women, it's for the men in our lives too, for the dads raising daughters and sons, helping, break those cycles so that our kids grow up having a different narrative when it comes to women's health, particularly with period literacy. This is also for our partners who want to better understand what our cycles consist of and how they impact us as women day to day. Because in some ways, if we start teaching our kids as they're young, I really feel the support is going to show up healthier and stronger when women go through the hardest hormonal change of their life, that menopause, perimenopause shift. That 45 to 55 is where a lot of us start to disengage in things that maybe we loved, even relationships we've had, we sort of walk away. There's a lot of brain fog, there's depression, there's sadness, there's all these sorts of behaviors that people are seeing in us in this age range, and think all these sorts of things that really aren't helpful for what we truly need in that time, which is all the love, all the support, all the patience. And I think if we can't start young, well, it's really hard to show up in the future when we're going through these hard things. So let's jump into my live chat with Dr. Anne. Go check out her new podcast, From Face to Face, the Hormone Health Show. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm so excited to do this with you. I'm really nervous because we record, as you know, with the podcast. We don't do live. So,
We're on the other side, right? Like of things, you're asking the question. So
also that.
That's great. We've talked many a time before, so it'll be the same way.
And I have my notes. I know that I talk a lot, so I was like, I gotta write notes so I don't go on for 6 hours. It's like a quick 20-minute conversation, so I'm trying to,
Takes more time. Like I've had a few that are longer. But let's dive in, because I do want to talk about periods and how we talk about periods in South Asian families.
Yes.
Specific, like we both come from different backgrounds, obviously. I was just sharing as we were trying to bring you on that I grew up with no menstrual health education, and my first period was when I was in Pakistan, and it took me by shock. And then I did continue to not learn about it at all, right? And continue to not talk about it, and that led to, even as I got older and did learn about it, still not talking about it within our families. And I think in South Asian families, there is this theme, and in other cultures too, of not having uncomfortable conversations, difficult conversations, things where you really need to get vulnerable. Yeah. I think it is very hard. And as we know in Canada, the people of South Asian descent do have a very poor uptake of even understanding and seeking out care for mental health. And I think that this is a very important intersection for us to talk about. So, in your experience, and I know you've also brought like such wonderful humans onto your podcast, and I'm sure you've learned a lot from them as they've learned from you. Like, how do we start chipping away at topics that have poor uptake or that have been off limits within our families or within our communities in the past?
Yeah, like, okay, so first of all, I just want to thank you for doing this, because I think this right here, this conversation is exactly what we need to do. We don't need to have posts and TikTok videos of like a billion people liking something to make it valid. Two people or even a conversation in our own head is really important. And I think when you ask this question, like sometimes you have to start at the beginning. And often when we want change, we kind of start in the middle. And if we go back to the beginning, I think we have to look at, like, when I was a little girl, what kind of messages did I digest about menstrual health, reproductive health? And even when we start at, you have an infant male, an infant female, and you open their diaper, there's all these cutesy terms to address a boy's penis, even though we should be calling it a penis, but there's all these cute ways of, and we have fathers that are afraid to open their daughters' diapers and change them. A vagina is so scary. We don't even have a cutesy term for a vagina. It's sexual, it's inappropriate, it's impure. So we start there. And then when we fast forward to early adolescence getting our period, there's all this stigma attached to it. We continue to be impure. We're dirty. We call it that time of month. We don't even talk about it. We're taught the hygiene part, how to keep it clean. But then society has commercials where you throw on a tampon or a pad and you go do an Ironman and live your life. And you think, oh, okay, so I have to normalize this by being okay. And I think when you don't have terms and language to address like anxiety, the exhaustion, cramps, you suffer silently. And so the way to chip away is what we're doing, which is slowly, even in our own heads, start addressing these euphemisms, these sorts of unsaid things that we've been taught growing up. And if I can, I would also add, like, for our South Asian women, religious practice is really important, spiritual practice. And that time of the month when we really need God tells us in many of our communities we can't come over because we have our period. And so lots of our South Asian practices where we look at religion, we're not allowed to go to the temple or go to the mosque or go pray. And I think we have to challenge spiritual self-care as well. So when we're constantly taught on the outside what we're going through is not okay, then of course we're going to look at it as something bad and something to not talk about. So it's science. It's not shame. You know what I mean? Like, so I think we have to start to address it in a way of, okay, this is scary, but it's a version that we've been taught. And can we look at other versions of addressing it?
Yeah, especially because like we get a period every month, for decades of our lives. Yeah. It was fascinating to me when I like really started to think about this, that we just say it in whispers. We hide period products up our sleeves. My phrase is like, we open up the packaging with the stealth of a ninja, right? Like that's kind of how we've been trained to be unseen and unheard, and that's the rhetoric around like women and other minorities in general, right? Like we don't want to see you, we don't want to hear from you also. And that does something to you on the inside, right? Like that you carry a lot of that invisible burden with you in so many different parts of your life. And I would say even like in professional life, if we even see like leaders, right? Like thankfully we have more women leaders, but leaders we're women of color, we have less.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and this is a very multi-layered, multifaceted topic, because then we're also taking a look at the structural barriers that exist, right? Like apart from some of the individual, personal, cultural ones that we have. How do you work on this out from yourself?
I think, like, I'm a mom of two boys, 14 and almost 12. And I have a really cute period story that I shared on one of our podcasts that you and I did together. But really for me, it was starting to, you do this really well, teach us how to track. And so before I even started talking to the kids, it was my own figuring out, like, what is my cycle like? And also understanding it evolves, it changes. Like I'm not a flaw. My body and all this, mine and period is not a flaw. It's a flow. And so when I started tracking and understanding certain days, the phases beforehand, all these sorts of things, again, that our elders, our role models weren't taught, allowed me the understanding and how to talk to my boys. Like, I hate it when we say she's crazy. And we do that a lot. We grew up doing that a lot. And I also really am sensitive to the fact that my husband and I have been together for 24 years. I'm in my mid 40s. And when I was younger, I would look at couples where I'm at and they'd be breaking up and she went crazy. She went south. And now I'm in this phase where my period is like a blessing. When I was 20, it was a burden. I hated it. I'd plan pool trips around my period. And now I'm like, yay, it means I'm healthy. So I think it's like understanding for myself that this is not a bad thing so that I can then teach my boys. And it's so cute because they'll ask me like, oh, what day of 5 are you on? And they know day 2 is difficult for me. And so they'll be gentle with me because it's like, we're not mocking it. It's not gross. This is a part of their life too. They might have daughters. They might be with women when they're older, and they need to understand how this process works. And so in order for them to understand, I have to get a better understanding of it. And I think it also allows me to go back and apologize because I can struggle during certain parts of my phase where I'm very impatient and not kind. And so now I know that this is because I'm getting my period. Now I have my period. And so I can go back to the boys and also say, I'm really sorry for how I was impatient about that one thing or how I treated you, and they get it. And it's not, oh, it's an excuse. They understand. So I think we just start with normalizing it in our home and not waiting for doctors and schools to teach our kids. Like, we have to be able to share the conversation about, this is a hard month for me, and this is, I'm bleeding very heavily. Like, these are things that, can you imagine talking to our dad like about these things, or our moms, right? And that saddens me that our elders didn't get to have those conversations, but we can break those barriers. So yeah.
It's true, and we are breaking those barriers, right? Like I when I published my book, my dad, his brother, my brother, right? Like, my whole family was there at my book launch, holding my book, and it was a very like beautiful moment for me, even though like they might not know this, because like historically we never even talked about it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I talked about it with my mom, obviously, and when she was going through menopause, like, I was in naturopathic school at the time, so like we talked about all of those things. But by the time like I had a full understanding of my period, like, my mom was already, you know, on her way out.
Yeah.
And so the conversations were very, very different. And I love the thing that you said, it's not a flaw, it's a flow. That's so sweet. Also because like I love wordplay.
Yeah.
But that's what it is, right? Like, I always say, like, you don't have to love your period, right? But we can't always look at it from a negative lens. Like, it happens to us all the time. It's just a fact of life, and it's a very natural process. The cycling of hormones is a natural process, and that's exactly what you're sharing with your boys at this point in time, right? Like, obviously, we don't want you to suffer, but there will be changes as you go across your cycle, and with age too, because then you have this cumulative experience that's impacting your periods and your hormones, because ultimately your hormones don't exist in a bubble. Your menstrual cycle doesn't exist in a bubble. It's been impacted by your life, your environment, what you're currently going through, your, right, like all of the things, and your medical history. And even like that evolution, and you sharing that with them will be so important, because it will help them identify and understand, regardless of what role menstruators play in their life. It also drives us toward compassion and inclusivity and understanding, and that's what we need more of in this world, especially as you know, right now there are wild things happening. Okay, and then how about, I'm just like looking at my questions. I'm like, where do I want to go here? And I think the other thing that you shared really well was just communicating. And actually, in science, we know that when we share our menstrual experiences with other menstruators, we bond. And with non-menstruators in our family or in our circle, we actually have better periods. Because, like you said, you feel a little bit guilty and you go back and say, but you also know that there's an understanding because you've had those conversations. How does that feel now for you, like, compared to before?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a complicated answer because you know me, I do this, but when we just look at shame, silence, guilt, I think it also is connected to our history. And I always bring up colonization because I'm learning so much about how we have been taught as a community. And today, even in this conversation between you and I, how silencing, how pushing through, how obeying comes up. And I think that's what we're constantly pushing against and fighting. And we don't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until recently. Like, oh, this is why we don't talk about these things. And this is why there's shame around that. And just understanding that makes, again, you feel like it's science, it's not shame, it's part of life. I didn't do anything wrong, and my cycle also is not going to be the same as my neighbors, my friends, or whatnot. And we try to like normalize it all as it's the same thing. And now we can understand our bodies in a bit of a different way. And I think where that really plays a part is a lot of our South Asian women, I think they feel betrayed by their body because we haven't been taught to manage the grief when we can't have a baby, when our period is telling us all these things like PCOS and we don't find out about it way later. And so we deserve to go through that grief process, because I also think we can rebuild trust with our bodies again as well. And that's sort of the phase I'm in. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm bordering perimenopause. And my husband and I, again, been together for so long. He and I are learning, both of us, through his hormone journey, my hormone journey. Like, sometimes you get so connected with a version of your history, a version of your relationship, and you know each other in this way. But can we just like relearn about each other from a brand new way? Because I'm completely different than I was 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And that's very empowering for me, and without feeling guilty or bad or missing this side of me. It's like, oh, this is a new phase I'm entering. Can we get to know this Kieran? And I think the more we talk about it, the more we get to do that. And so that brings me joy. Like, period's not pain. It can be joy. It can be a blessing. It can be a whole learning process.
There's so many good things that you said that I want to highlight. Especially like the grief part and the evolving relationship with yourself and your history, because as you said, as we get older, we look at things in a very different way, and we should look at things in a very different way, right? Like, if we can't unknow things, and if we aren't reflecting on some of those things, then what are we even doing?
Yeah.
Right. But if I think about like even people, like children of immigrants, for example, our parents came to a place and they were trying to keep everything safe in the status quo and not be seen and just fit in. And we're the generation that is moving beyond that to speaking up and stepping into roles of leadership. And it's very difficult. And similar to you, I have been with my husband for 20 years now. And same thing, like, right, like we have evolved as individuals, our relationship has evolved, my relationship with myself has evolved, and even looking at the agency of women in general, especially in South Asian households, because that's our background, right? Like, so let's keep it there. We didn't have access to money, our own money, right? Like we weren't really like taken seriously. No one wanted to hear our voices, and it's so disempowering. But we carry that within us. And every time, like, I reflect on my history, I'm like, oh, I should have done this before, or I should have done this earlier, or I should have started investing earlier. But like, I'm like, I literally didn't know anything about anything. And it is a process of reconciliation with that part of yourself where you thought you should have known it. And obviously, like, this happens in all kinds of people, right? Like, doesn't matter what your background is. It could happen in different situations, just different context. And same thing, right? Like, I have a lot of patients, regardless of what their background is. So I wish I had known this sooner.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and there is this grief that comes along with that. But at the same time, there is like that piece where we can feel empowered by it and move forward from it. How in your work, like, how do people start to reconcile with it? Because sometimes it feels really, really icky.
It does. And I think when you go from like empowering, like the silence, the stigma, to this other extreme, it's like going from +30 weather to -30 weather. It's like we have to also slow down and be in between, which is kind of where I live a lot in. And I think sometimes I'm like, oof, because here you and I are, two South Asian women in the generation that's just on the cusp of breaking barriers, trying to set something up for the next generation. And we're like health advocates, yay. But then we also have to code switch. And maybe later we're going to go to community events where we have to be the good brown daughter. And our community members maybe aren't ready to talk about some of these things. And I think that's like emotional labor, that's exhaustion. And I think when we're breaking a stigma, we have to be okay to recognize that it's not all Wonder Woman superhero. It's hard. And speaking up is like building a muscle that you slowly exercise and it gets stronger. And there's those of us that are willing to speak up. But I think we all have to be willing to listen up. And sometimes when I'm not ready to speak up, I don't understand when people like you maybe are, and I'm not willing to listen. And there's a lot of women in our community that don't feel like they have a voice, but I think they also don't want to hear some of these barriers we're trying to break because it's sad. It makes you, hindsight's a bitch, right? And you look back, like we said, I'm fine. Why do we have to do this? And I think we have to stop that and be willing to listen a little bit more because you have this wonderful book. You have so much insight and you're a doctor who is willing to talk about her own stuff, which is like vulnerability. We don't get doctors that want to go outside of medical conversation. You share your story. You have so much that you talk about. And this is how we break that. This is how we accept that. But we have to be willing to listen. I think at the end of the day. And so speak up if you can, but listen, like we all can do that. So that would be my suggestion. Like it's not easy.
And I think that's what it is too, right? Like because we've all done so many not easy things.
Yeah.
that it's another hard thing to do. And it is. And like you said, it's exhausting, but it is work that needs to be done. And I think the younger generation maybe is a little bit better at this perhaps than we are. But at the same time, like for me, I always think of, I'm like, we're that bridge between like the older generation and the younger generation.
Yeah, we are.
Right? And the older generation, right? Like whenever I go traveling, my mom's always like, that's so great.
Yeah.
Right? Like because she didn't get to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the little things that like often also offer me perspective. And I think the same thing, I think we need to listen to our elders a little bit more, not from like a listen to your elders place, but actually having a conversation space because there's so much we can learn from them. And then so much that we can also heal for them because they get to share their story. So you're right. I think like the word maybe is that we need to communicate a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that's a two-way street.
Totally.
I think oftentimes even about like talking to my parents, I'm like, I don't really know your like full story. I know bits and pieces, right? But it is very difficult to talk to the people sometimes who are closest to you, and it's easier to talk to the people who are a little bit removed from you. How do we get over those barriers of like talking to the people who maybe we haven't ever talked to like this in this way?
I think we just have to take risks. I think we got to start with ourselves. Like, do I feel comfortable? How do I get comfortable? Because sometimes we don't even want to address it within our own head, within ourselves. And so starting with myself and having these conversations out loud, like our brain appreciates when we say things out loud, when we write things down, because it likes patterns. That's a survival safety thing. So just from a science perspective, even just saying it out loud before we're going to have that conversation. And I think there is, like, we have to credit our elders. Sometimes I think about my mom, my grandma, my aunts, like these role models that helped shape me. They did not have the space to have these conversations. They didn't have the support. They didn't have the language. And look at where we are. We're doing it. So sometimes we're doing all these things and moving fast. We're not even recognizing that, holy crap, two brown women got together, like a Punjabi woman, a Pakistani woman got together and had this, even just that, right? Like there's so many different elements that we push through because we're trying to make all these changes. But I think we have to also just kind of sit in it sometimes too. And those conversations will come for sure. They are happening. They're just, I think we're trying to go from one extreme to the other. So we have to give ourselves some grace and some compassion in them too. They're not perfect. Like my conversations with my kids aren't perfect, let alone what I want to say to my mom and my dad. But we'll get there. We'll get there slowly. And I think one thing at a time.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because I'm just thinking about even having those conversations and stepping away from it. It can feel really uncomfortable, especially if, like, in conversations like this, there's no like resolution, right? Like, you don't come to a destination of some kind. The journey is the actual conversation, and you just continue to have it and learn from one another. And I want to tie this back to menstrual health and periods in general. And health is like that too. It's not like a finite destination. You don't just reach health. It's an evolving thing. You get to define it. And same thing about like speaking up in a medical doctor's office, or in your healthcare appointments, right? Like, it can be really uncomfortable, especially if you come from a background of not having had uncomfortable conversations, or conversations where you really have to speak through your anxiety. I remember I used to like write all the things down and take them to my doctor, and my heart would be beating really, really fast, because it's hard to talk about yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe not for everybody, but like for a lot of us, and we don't get to see that, right? Like, because the heart is pounding on the inside.
Yes.
My brain is going wild on the inside.
Yep.
And on the outside, I might come across very, very calm, when on the inside, I'm an utter mess.
Yeah.
So I think that's also what these conversations do, right? Like, it gives you a glimpse into our brains, our very messy, messy, messy brains, because that is how most people's brains work. And the more we talk, the more we understand that. So in healthcare appointments too, I will encourage anyone watching, like, write it down, and then you can always practice. I practice in front of the mirror. I practice on my drive over. Oftentimes, like, I practice a lot of conversations, and then the words come out better.
Yeah.
They might not come out perfect, which is totally fine.
Totally.
But they come out a little bit better, a little bit easier, especially because, like, I know I get really emotional when I talk about, honestly, like, anything. But,
I know. I don't know how I'm not crying on my period right now. Can I add to that, the medical piece? Because I'm really glad you brought that up. I think, like, I've told this story before and I won't get into it, but I remember what the medical professionals said to me when I gave birth to my first child, because I was like phenomenal at it. I did a really good job. It was quick. And there is such a stigma against us South Asian women when we go seek medical help. And because for so long we're expected to keep our pain invisible, that we don't even know how to, like you said, communicate it or talk about it. And I think sometimes we leave in these medical spaces feeling gaslit, but we don't even know that. We think, oh, I did something wrong. And it took me like, I was like recent years old realizing a lot of the medical research is done based off of white people. So those of us of color go get medical help. We're just adapting to research that hasn't really considered our anatomy, the environment we've moved from to in North America. And these like nuances, these unsaid stigmas, they show up between a doctor or a nurse and a woman or person of color. And we're just expected to let that be, or that's not the case, or you didn't see it that way. And I think we have to like bring that out more and keep talking about that. So our moms, our grandmas, our aunts, people that maybe aren't having the language that you and I now are learning can understand. Because I think that also plays a huge part of why we think health is selfish versus it being sacred. And because we're taught, oh yeah, you're just overreacting. And that saddens me too, because I at least have the voice when I go to a doctor's office and capacity to understand what the nurse is doing when she's, the thing she's not saying to me, but I feel like I'm overreacting because I took my son to the doctor for something. And I think we have to push against that more and more so that our professionals will do their work as well, because anti-racism is a huge part of this conversation when we talk about medical health. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I know it's uncomfortable, but everyone deserves to have quality care. It does not matter what our color is and what our gender is, what our age is. So not everyone experiences it in the way that they have a right to.
Yeah, especially in this age of rising white supremacy. Like, this is kind of wild that we're living in times that we live in. But I want to touch on two things that you said. Number one was like health is selfish. And that's such an important piece, like, especially as I reflect on the older generation, right? Like our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, because they would give and not take, right? Like, and that's like, I'm still processing it, as you can see, as I speak my words to you. But that's like such an interesting
Yeah.
piece because they don't really think about themselves. They think about everyone else. And this is like women in general, right? Like women in general tend to be those people who put other people first, who lift other people up, and that's why we need more women leaders in general instead of these white fascist men. Let's just call it what it is, since we're going there.
True.
And then the other thing you said has slipped my mind now, so we'll let. Oh, the other thing I was going to say actually is going back to how we started this conversation about language and even like anatomical language, right? Like vulva versus vagina, right? Like oftentimes when people are coming in and they're like, "Well, I'm having issues in my private parts," and then I'm like, "Okay, let's tease this out a little bit because we need to be on the same page. We need to be speaking the same language, and we need to understand where you're having issues, because that's how we determine like how we move forward, right? Like, is it on the inside, like in the vagina? Is it on the outside? Is it in the vulva? Like in which part? Like diagrams, right? And that can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So and I can see the discomfort on the face sometimes, right? I'm like, okay, is it okay if I pull up a diagram and we'll talk through like where you're experiencing it? But this is the power of communication and education and having open conversation and not stigmatizing like a very, like, literally our body, something that we live in every single day.
Yeah. And then it's like there's so much stigma with the vagina, but then it's at the same time it's this how babies are born, and our community is all about fertility and babies and all that, but where there's such a disconnect from that. And I always wonder, like, where do you think these babies are coming from when you speak that way of us women? And so I think understanding that and being curious to that and not even having the answers, but just getting that, I think that's part of that. Exactly. And like I am like also this many years old before I know the difference between a vulva, like, because it's has not been taught to us, and what we learned in school was embarrassing. Like, I don't want to sit in front of schoolmates with a teacher telling me about it, and our homes certainly didn't talk about it. But then now I have this responsibility with my kids where I do need to know these things and the science medical terms, because I don't want them calling our body parts, private parts or what. I want them to understand that too. And so it's like, I don't know, it's so simple, but yet we've complicated it over the years. And I think, again, the conversation, talking, understanding it helps us chip away at it in the way that, you're hoping to as well. Being open to like learning about our patterns, what we go through. Like, our moms don't even know about the different phases before, during, after. I didn't even know about them until recently either, and then I think, holy crap, I've lived with having a period all these years and I've only now. So I think that's also like okay saying that, because I think sometimes we assume that everyone knows better than I do or more than I do, but a lot of us are, like you said, screaming in our head, and then on the outside being like, yes, I know it all. I know it all.
Totally. I think we need real honest conversations and vulnerability and understanding that everyone is on their own path and at their own pace. And that pace is determined by so many different variables. And the unfortunate part of all of this is something like you just said, is that we don't receive age appropriate education, right? Like, we receive it at the beginning when it's not a priority, when it's not so relevant because you're busy being a teenager, you know what I mean? And then we're left in the wild to learn everything else on our own, unless you were in a program that specifically taught you about your body, right? And then, unfortunately, and especially in our Canadian healthcare system, we have such short appointment times that there's no opportunity to educate it. There's no opportunity to sort of tie multiple pieces of our health together. And that's not necessarily a failing of the doctor, it's actually a failing of the system that is overburdened and underfunded, right? Like, and when we could obviously have another conversation just on that.
Yeah.
But I do want to wrap it up. Like, what now as we end this, approach the end of this conversation, and you can sort of reiterate something that we've already said, but what do you want people to move forward with as they're exploring their relationship with their menstrual cycles and how they talk about it within their families or communities?
I think, yeah, like a lot of what we've said is just acknowledging that we're all experiencing these parts of our, whether it's our mental health or reproductive health, everything in between. And I think it's okay for us to start to question, start to talk, even if we just start with ourselves. And those of us that feel like we're late to the party, as I always say, and I've been taught recently to not say that because it's the guilt that we carry over the years. And I think we just have to be okay to address that. It's guilt, it's shame, it's silence, and we can address it by just acknowledging that, look, this is my body, this is what I'm going through, this is who I am. Where I am at one part of the year is going to be different at the other part of the year. So can I have some compassion for myself? So as we're just starting to scratch the surface with these things, I think we just have to be kind to ourselves, to each other. And as women, South Asian women, women of color, I think we can continue doing what we're trying to do, which is building a community, being able to build safe space so that we can have these conversations and acceptance, whether we show up saying something or saying nothing, just knowing that there's other women out there that are helping break some barriers as well as willing to share their pain, their experiences. So I think just keep doing what we're doing, which is starting small, just talk, get it out. That's the key.
Yeah, I love that. And when the thoughts come about, like, I wish I had done this before, the thought comes and we let it pass, we acknowledge it, and then it will come again, and it will come again.
Yeah.
And it will come again, right? Like sometimes we think there's going to be a tidy little bow at the end of acknowledgement and understanding, but it doesn't work that way.
No, we have to go through it a few times. Like, every month, like you said, many of us get our period and it seems like it's Groundhog Day. We're relearning it. Oh, right. I feel this way about my body. I feel bloated. I don't love looking at myself in the mirror. Oh, because it's my period. I got to be kinder to myself. And our body remembers. That's the thing. Like it doesn't forget, it remembers. So we have to just, this vessel that we're using to live this life, we have to be kinder to it.
Totally. Thank you so much for being here. I love this conversation. I always love talking to you. We usually go places, and then we do. Yeah. And then we land somewhere. Where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? And how can they learn more from you?
Yeah, so on Instagram at MFU Podcast, keep the conversation going. Our episodes, we have like over 130. Anywhere you find your music and podcasts, you're on 2 of them as well. I think it's episode 93 and episode 107. We talk about weight stigma and we talk about what does a normal period look like. And yeah, so those are the main places to reach out if you want to keep a conversation going or start a new one. So thank you for asking. Yeah.
Podcast is amazing. Go listen to it. Go subscribe to it. And I will talk to you later. I hope you have a great weekend. And thanks once again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.